The Surprise Island, Boxcar Children, Chapter 12, The Picnic. The children were waiting upon the dock when Joe came back, but it was too late then to find Mr. Browning. Jessie began, "You know, Joe, Grandfather said he should never build a fire outdoors unless someone older helped us. Now, we have such a good place for a picnic. We thought we'd invite our school friends over for a picnic on the beach. They have never seen the island." "I'll be glad to help you build a fire if that's what you want," said Joe. "Oh, thanks, Joe," said Jessie. The four children invited their friends over Captain Daniel's telephone. All of them said that they would come. Henry's friend was a tall boy named Morris Wilder, and Jessie's friend was Morris's sister, Marjorie. Violet invited her friend, Barbara Black. Benny surprised them by saying that he wanted to invite Mike Wood, a little boy who was always in trouble. "Mike and Benny will be quite a pair," cried Henry. "But I suppose he can invite anyone he likes. We all did." "We'll have fish chowder for dinner," said Jessie. "We can always get some fish from Captain Daniel. And we'll all pick blueberries after the others get here," said Henry. "That will be something for us to do." When the guests arrived, Watch was very excited. Mike had brought his big white dog, Spotty, with him. Jessie had a hard time trying to keep the dogs from fighting, but after a lot of barking, Watch and Spotty became friends. So there's Watch and Spotty. "Let's race the dogs, Ben," cried Mike, who could never be still very long. The two boys held the dogs for a minute and then let go of them. Both dogs seemed to understand, for they raced to the beach where they dropped, panting, on the sand beside Joe. Watch knew the way, and he got there first. "Spotty got there first," shouted Mike. "He did not," cried Benny. "He didn't even know the way." Benny, said Henry. "Don't start the picnic fighting." "Watch got there first, and you know it," said Benny. "Spotty's better than Watch," said Mike. "Spotty's not better than Watch," shouted Benny. "Watch can run faster than Spotty, and he got there first in the race." "You started this fight, Ben," said Mike. "I did not start it," shouted Benny. "Yes, you did," shouted Mike. "Now you listen to me, young fellow," said Morris, catching Mike's hand. "You stop, or you'll have to go home." Mike began to jump up and down, when suddenly he jumped on a very sharp shell. Then Mike sat down holding his foot and crying at the same time. Henry sat down too and tried to look at Mike's foot. He took out his box of things for fixing cuts. "Keep still now, Mike," he said. "You've got a long cut here, but it's not deep. Let me fix it." The cut foot was a big help for everyone. It kept Mike in sight all morning, while the four older children and Joe picked blueberries. At noon, Jessie and Violet watched while Joe made a fire and boiled some water. Henry and Morris cut the potatoes and onions, and the chowder was soon ready. Everyone enjoyed the chowder, and the boys had made enough extra for supper too. After blueberries and milk, Jessie and Violet washed the dishes in the ocean, while Benny and Mike walked away slowly. "Keep an eye on Mike, Henry," said Jessie. "I can see them. They are just sitting over there on the rocks," said Henry. But the next time he looked, the boys were gone. "Where could they go?" he cried, getting up quickly. "There's no place for them to go because I can see the whole beach." But the little boys were not in sight. As Henry climbed upon the rocks, he was very glad to hear Benny's voice. "I wonder who left the bottle here," said Benny. Henry and Morris looked under the rocks into the tiny cave. "How in the world did you boys get in there?" asked Henry. "This stone came off," said Benny. "It was like a door, and we pulled it away. It was awfully heavy." "Say, you fellows climb out of there and let us go in," said Morris. The little boys obeyed at once, and the two older boys crawled in and looked around. They saw a big stone table with an old bottle on it. "Let's take the old bottle," said Henry. "There may be something inside." So you can see they have a bottle on like a flat plate. "Look, Joe," said Morris. "See what Ben and Mike found?" "There's a paper inside the bottle," said Henry. "Shall we take it out?" Well, why not? Said Joe, turning it over. Maybe there's a name on the paper. Let me get the paper out with my knife, said Henry. The mouth of the bottle was just wide enough for the knife. Henry pulled the paper out easily and read, "If found, give to J. Alden, 6 feet from across to Red Rock and 3 feet down. J.A. and R.W." Grandfather must have left it here when he was a boy, said Henry. But I don't see any cross. I do, said Mike. It's right over there. He pointed at a strange rock. It did look like a cross. And there's a red rock, cried Violet. See? This will be easy, said Morris. You run a string from the cross straight to the red rock. Then what does it say? He looked at the paper again. 6 feet. Well, 6 feet from the cross, you dig down for 3 feet. There must be something there. The children were excited as they tied the string to the red rock. Joe showed them where 6 feet would be. Then they took turns digging with a spoon. With Watch and Spotty to help, they dug a hole 3 feet deep, but there was nothing in it but water. After an hour's digging, they had still not found anything. We can dig some other day, said Henry at last. It may be down 12 feet since the paper is very old. All the children but Mike were tired and were glad to sit down on the grass. The little fellow still sat beside the hole with Spotty, digging away with the spoon. Then suddenly he began to shout. "It's mine! It's all mine! Because I found it! You can't say it because you all stopped digging!" So there they are with the rock and the cross. When the children ran to the hole, they saw that Mike pulling out a black box covered with wet sand. And Mike went right on shouting, "I found the cave too, and made Ben help me take the door off. And I found the cross, and I dug out the box, and it's all mine." "Don't talk so much. Of course it's yours, Mike," said Henry. "Why don't you open it?" It was not hard to do this because the box was very old. Mike pulled off the cover with his fingers, and the children saw a pile of old money. Mike put the money, one piece at a time, in the cover of the box. "Just $5, said Morris. "What a lot of money, Mike." "Grandfather will give him the $5 bill, said Jesse. "I think he would like to keep his old money. He put it here when he was a boy. Wouldn't you like to have a new $5 bill, Mike?" Yes, of course, said Mike, who had never had even a dollar bill before in his whole life. Just then, the children heard a shout coming from the water. Then they noticed a boy in a rowboat who was standing up shouting and pointing at the water. A dark head showed for a minute and then went out of sight. "There's somebody in the water too," cried Morris. Henry heard Joe say to himself, "I'm well now. I'm not afraid." Joe took off his shoes, jumped into the water, and swam very fast. "Bring the boat here," he shouted to the boy in the boat. But the boat went right past him. "Oh, come back, Joe," cried Benny. "He'll come back all right," said Morris. "He's a wonderful swimmer, look." As Morris spoke, Joe swam underwater suddenly. When he came up, he was pulling the boy to the rowboat. It seemed hours before Joe finally got the boy into the boat and pulled himself in. "Good for Joe," shouted Henry. I hope he got there in time." "Everybody ought to know how to swim," said Morris. "That boy was afraid. He just stood there and yelled. He couldn't even bring him the boat over when Joe asked him to." All this time, Mike had not said anything. He stood very still as he looked out at the water. The little fellow seemed to be turned into stone. "Why are you so scared?" asked Henry. "I think it's Pat," said Mike, still staring at the boat. "Pat? Who's he?" asked Henry. "He's my brother," said Mike. "He's 11 years old. I think he is the one in the water." "You can't see that far," said Morris. "What makes you think so, Mike?" "Well, I told him there would be something to eat at this picnic and that maybe we'd play ball." "I began to see," said Henry, looking at Morris. "Do you know who the other boy is?" "It's maybe Johnny," said Mike. "I told Johnny too, and he knew about a rowboat he could get." "How did they get the boat?" asked Morris. "They just took it," said Mike. "What an awful thing to do," shouted Henry. "Besides, they can't swim or even row." It did seem so, for Joe was rowing. One boy was out of sight in the boat, and the other boy sat at one end. When Jessie saw the boat coming, She called to Marjorie. Let's run to the barn and get some blankets and towels. Good for you, Jessie, called Joe when the girls brought the blankets. Lay them down on either side of the fire. Jessie and Marjorie spread out the blankets while Henry and Morris caught the boat as it landed on the beach. It is Pat, said Mike in a frightened voice. Isn't it, Johnny? Yes, said Johnny, but he'll be all right. This man said so. He's lucky, said Henry. Lucky that Joe knew how to swim. Pat was very still when the boys helped Joe lift him out of the boat and roll him into the blanket by the fire. We won't talk to him now, said Joe, rubbing the boy's hair with the towel. We'll let him sleep first. He's all tired out. I guess you won't have to talk to him, said Johnny, who was very white. We won't ever take a boat out again. No, I don't believe you will either, called Joe as he went back to the hut for dry clothes. Just then Mike said, Pat didn't get any dinner. Will you heat up a chowder for him, Henry? He can't eat when he's sound asleep, can he? Asked Morris. No, but he'll wake up when he smells the chowder, said Mike. Maybe I could have some more myself, because I didn't eat much for lunch. Oh, I should say you didn't, said Morris. Only 3 bowls full. I'll tell you what we can do, said Joe, who had come back wearing dry clothes. We have just enough to play ball. If Mike is eating and doesn't want to play. Oh, I want to play. I want to play, shouted Mike, jumping up and down, forgetting about the cut on his foot. And so all the children played ball. Later, there was more chowder for everyone, and Pat did wake up when he smelled the food. This is the best picnic I've ever been to, said Mike, passing his bowl again. Hold on there, warned Joe. Don't give him any more, Henry. 6 bowls of chowder in one day is enough for one small boy. Just then Captain Daniel came with a boat to take the children home. And now Benny began to cry because his friend was going to leave. Oh, what are you crying about, Ben? Asked Mike. I wouldn't cry at nothing. So nobody cried when the company started for home in the boat. When Mike could not hear Benny answer, he put his 2 hands up to his mouth and shouted, Spotty can run faster than Watch. Well, Benny, don't you care, said Henry. Just be glad the day is over with no more trouble. You're right, said Joe. What a day. Then Henry remembered that Joe had said he was well again. And when Henry told Jessie about it later, she thought it was very strange, too.